And I think this taps into the different, if from a neurobiological perspective, the different assessment approaches of the front brain and the back brain. So with our front brain, our thinking, human neocortex and so on, we can assess risk in quite nuanced ways. We can think about it. We can take in lots of different inputs. We can analyze and work stuff out. And often as trauma survivors, our front brain capacities aren't very well developed on this because we've not grown up in an environment where people have taught us the skills of figuring out if someone's safe or unsafe, or figuring out cause and effect thinking to say, if I do this, there are risks involved. So we have an underdeveloped front brain and we have a more active back brain. So our back brain is our survival-based part of us, which is there to keep us safe. But the back brain is very, very primitive, and it doesn't work so much in terms of nuanced assessment. It works more in terms of scripts and beliefs and principles, which it applies across the board. So it's less flexible and it's more automatic and so on, and often uses things as a proxy for a risk assessment instead. So, for example, familiarity. So familiarity to the back brain feels safe because generally in life and through our evolution, it's been a good rule of thumb for life. It's not always accurate, but the people you are familiar with, generally speaking, will be safer than the strangers from the next tribe. Generally speaking, the foods that you're used to and that you're familiar with will be safer than the mushroom that you've never eaten before, that you've just foraged in a different part of the forest. So as a general basic principle, familiar being safe isn't a bad way to go about things. But that only works if you're familiar with what's safe. So if your family basis has been unsafe, then you'll become familiar with the unsafe, and so unsafe will feel safe. So growing up in danger feels familiar, and so therefore to the back brain, well, danger is safe. That's okay because it's familiar. It's not new. Another example would be the back brain's drive for homeostasis or for sameness. So if it's the same as what we've had before, it's very similar to familiar, but it's the same, that will feel safe. So we want to fulfill the scripts we believe about ourselves because they're familiar. So if we grow up being told that we're a waste of space, that we're no good, we'll never amount to anything, our back brain wants to see that come true, wants to see that played out because it's what we've always had. It's the homeostasis, it's keeping things the same. So change feels scary to the back brain because, generally speaking, keeping things the same, well, if we're okay now, we'll be okay in the future. So the front brain can look at a new situation, an unfamiliar situation or person, and work it out and say, okay, I need to figure out, I've never met this person before. I need to bring some principles to bear here. I need to watch their behavior over a period of time. I need to, lay some little tests for them to see if they do what they say they're going to do, if they are who they say they are. And I need to do that slowly, gradually. I need to be fairly objective about it. Whereas the back brain is just, well, they're new, so that's probably dangerous. And so they feel unsafe. So a survivor comes into therapy with you as a therapist. They could, with their front brain, assess your safety. They could say, well, are you qualified? What experience have you got? What do people say about you? Do you come on recommendation from somebody else? They could then spend their time in sessions with you saying, well, do you do what you say you do on the tin? Do you seem to have good boundaries? Do you seem to know what you're doing? How do I feel about the way that you're treating me? There could be that period of learning to trust, and that's what the front brain does. Meanwhile, their back brain is going, this person is unsafe because they're new. It's a complete change seeing this person, and everything they're saying isn't familiar. It's not the same as I've had before. So I'm expecting them to tell me to get a grip and to get over myself and stop being a crybaby. And they're not saying that. So therefore, they're unsafe. So I think a lot of it is this conflict between the way that the front brain and the back brain assess for safety. And so in changing that, we need to resource the front brain. First of all, resourcing the front brain to be online. And so that's the re-regulation piece of the work, because when we feel unsafe, we get pushed out of the green zone into amber zone or into the red zone, and the front brain switches off, the back brain takes over. So the more there is unsafety in our lives generally, the less able we will be to assess risk accurately with the front brain, because the front brain's not active. So resourcing the front brain by being in the green zone, helping the client to recognise what is a front brain way of assessing risk and what's a back brain way of assessing it. So giving them that language and that sort of framework for it, of saying, okay, so they feel unsafe. Is that a generalised sense that you've got? Doesn't seem to have much data to it, so that's probably a back brain way of approaching this. Whereas a front brain way would be looking for the detail, looking for the data, breaking it down, getting it from different sources, so that the client can start to see, oh, okay, it feels unsafe, but that's back brain speaking. Okay, back brain might be right, but also what we're doing in recovering from trauma is getting the front brain to dominate over the back brain, not to exclude it, but to take in its inputs as part of the picture, not the whole picture. And then progressively, I think in therapy, working as a coach to their front brain and helping them with the skills to know, well, I would assess someone based on X, Y, Z, or pointing them towards helpful books, podcasts, and so on and so forth. I've just actually this morning released a new podcast on how to build trust after trauma. So looking at some of the reasons there that we don't trust people and how we can learn to do it instead. And interestingly, almost straight away, there was a comment on one of the social media feeds from evidently, I presume, from a survivor, says, yeah, I'm not doing it, as in I'm not going to trust people. And so that is a back brain response. It makes perfect sense. Their back brain is saying the way to stay safe is to avoid all people. And that's not an unreasonable response, but obviously it has its limitations and it has its shortcomings in that we are a social species. For good mental health, physical health, well-being, we need to be connected. So if I were working with that person, I'd say, absolutely, I can understand where you're coming from on that. But that's a back brain response. What would a front brain response be? A front brain response would be, well, let's learn the skills I need to be able to assess risk with people, with situations and so on. And within that, I'd say about not adding fuel to the fire of the back brain, mixing my metaphors, but not giving more strength to the back brain. And I think that's where, especially when survivors club together with other survivors, there can be a proliferation of beliefs around how unsafe things are. I think that's what I find disturbing's too strong a word, but sort of mildly upsetting when I see survivors posting stuff that is a back brain response, because other survivors' back brains latch onto it and go, oh, it's not just me. Yeah, I'm not trusting people either. Whereas I've been very careful throughout my whole recovery journey to try and expose myself to people who have very developed front brains as well, and who have the skills to know how to assess risk, and then to be curious and to ask them and say, okay, you're taking on a new employee, you're taking on a new friend, you're going into a new situation. How would you assess it? What would you do? And often it takes people a bit of time to articulate the process they go through, because if you've grown up securely, you've just accumulated those skills without realizing. And that's where people who write books, podcasts, things like that, if they're good at what they do, they will break down the process of how people go about assessing risk. And so that can be a helpful thing for clients, for survivors to do, to make sure they're exposing themselves to people that they want to become like, rather than people that they are currently like. So I'm very careful to kind of select people in my life who are very green zone and who are, very secure, because I want to learn from that. I want to imbibe that. I don't want to constantly activate my nervous system into amber or red by being around a lot of nervous systems that are in amber and red as well. finally, the other thing I'd say about this safety, unsafety, risk perception thing is that what we've talked about so far is an inability to have a properly, or not properly, an effectively calibrated radar on it. But sometimes I know, certainly in my life, I would actively and intentionally put myself in danger. So it wasn't that my radar wasn't working, it was that I was making a choice to put myself in danger. The first time I remembered this happening, I was still at university, just had a mini breakdown at the beginning of my second year, and I would go out from college grounds at sort of 2-3 in the morning and walk through the back streets and into all sorts of dimly lit, totally unsafe areas, as a single female at the age of 19, 20, whatever I was. And there was something in me, Freud would call it the repetition compulsion, but there was something in me that was almost trying to replicate the danger and the circumstances of my childhood, almost because I think, looking back, I didn't have the language for it myself. I didn't have a narrative for what had happened to me as a child at that point. So I was trying almost back-brain communication to say, look, everybody, this is what it was like. So I think when we persist in putting ourselves in dangerous situations, a helpful thing to do there is to ask the question of, what are you trying to communicate through this? Are there times where you've been in that kind of danger in the past? Because there's something that's recurring, something that's repeating, that's wanting to be heard. So yeah, I had plenty of times where I just didn't realise that I was in danger and would put myself there. But sometimes when I knew full well that it was a jolly, silly thing for me to be doing, but there was something in me that was wanting to reactivate that. And probably in terms of what I've said about the back brain's way of approaching things, I was very probably seeking out what was familiar. Life was going well for me. I'd had a bit of a mini breakdown, but I was at university and loving everything that was going on. And that was in complete contradiction to 17, 18 years of my life previously. So it was like my back brain was saying, can we get back to normal again? Can something bad happen? Because this doesn't feel safe, the world being safe. We need to get it to be dangerous again so that it feels familiar, and then I know how to handle it. So I'd grown up knowing, in effect, how to handle danger and bad stuff happening. I didn't know how to handle life being safe and good and positive. And that's where it's almost like a self-sabotage seems to come in, that as things get better, we make them worse for ourselves. And understanding that that's just my back brain trying to feel safe again. It's just got a very, very primitive way of doing that. But my front brain I need to bring on to override it and to say, back brain, I get where you're at. I understand where you're coming from on that. No shame for that. But we're actually moving to a higher level now. And I think a lot of the work of trauma therapy, trauma recovery is moving from that back brain driven level to higher processing so that we can do things that are more effective, more adaptive to a different life, a life that's free of danger. Because that's what we have to learn a lot of the time. We have to learn how to live in safety, whereas we've had years of being trained how to live in danger. It's exactly the same dynamic as we train up soldiers to go and be on the front line where they are at risk of losing their life at any moment. We teach them to be hyper-vigilant, we teach them to be hyper-aroused, and then we put them back in civilian life without any retraining of how to live back in safety again. And then the mismatch between the two is what we call PTSD and trauma in their lives. Exactly the same dynamic for us growing up from complex trauma as well. You have to actually learn how to live in safety and safety feel safe.